In the land where I was born, there are now women seeking justice. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Thank you for tuning into Justice for Birth Mothers. My name is Anna Kavanagh, co-founder and convener to the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice, Ireland's largest non-Tusla funded group advocating on behalf of birth mothers in difficulty with Tusla, the Gardai and the family court. This is the 20th podcast in the series Justice for Birth Mothers. I'll be speaking to Michelle Monaghan, who is the lead researcher with the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice, about the misgivings that she has about a new agency that has come into existence earlier this year to replace Tusla's responsibility for domestic violence. Tusla, the Child and Family Agency, was set up under the Child and Family Agency Act of 2013 to support and promote the development, welfare and protection of children. It was also given responsibility for domestic violence, and that proved to be somewhat problematic. Finally, Helen McEntee, the Minister for Justice, set about reforming this and to create a new agency that would have responsibility for domestic violence. And as part of that, there was a consultation process which resulted in the launch of a report in May 2023. I'm here now with Michelle, who was present at that launch in May 2023. Michelle, would you like to tell me a little bit about the launch of that report? Maybe a little bit about what's in the report and how it came to be launched.
Yes, Anna. So on the 3rd of May, the launch was titled The Report on the Intersection of the Criminal Justice, Private Family Law and Public Law Childcare Process in relation to domestic and sexual violence. It was held in the Department of Justice, and it was launched by the National Women's Council and the Justice Minister, Simon Harris. The report was written by Ellen O'Malley Dunlop and Nuala Egan. And the report is basically describing how the processes and the experience of women at the moment and how the system is not working. However, in my opinion, on the day, to intersect an Garda Síochána, Tusla and the family courts, in my view, wouldn't be a resolution, because it is reported that, these systems aren't working. So to continue with the systems we have and join them together, in my view, it's set up to fail.
It's interesting that you should say that, because from the outset, since the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice was set up in 2019, we have referred to those three, the family courts, Tusla and the Gardai, as the triad. And indeed, we wrote a detailed report on how these three state agencies actually work together in a way that results in no justice for some birth mothers, and certainly for the mothers whose children are taken into care. So would you like to elaborate a little bit more on the problems that you believe is going to exist going forward now with the setting up of this new agency, which has been called CUAN, that's going to have responsibility for domestic violence?
Yeah, so as this report was being launched in May 2023, you had back in 2022 this launch of zero tolerance for domestic violence. So bear in mind that this zero tolerance campaign has been going on in the background while they're looking for the agency to be set up, and then this May report in 2023. But on the 25th of May last year, after the launch of this, where they want to join An Garda Síochána courts in Tusla together, the Department of Justice made a report on parent alienation. The FTAI, which is a Family Therapy Association of Ireland, it made a submission to it in 2022. They were stating, that parental alienation is an act of emotional violence, perpetrated on the alienated parent. And I suppose from your podcasts, Anna, we have gathered research in this area where a lot of allegations of domestic violence, they are not investigated by government bodies, and experts that are frequently from the FTAI working in the family court will say then that the child is parent alienated, and in a lot of occasions those children are actually taken away from the mother who's trying to protect them. So in my view, launching this report on the 3rd of May last year in 2023, and then on the 25th of May, launching a report on parental alienation with the same department, even just to have a report on it, I feel it's giving it some recognition, whereas the World Health Organization, doesn't recognize it. It's a pseudo concept. And then the FTAI, the Family Therapists Association, that are regularly in family law courts reporting on children's views, in June 2023, they withdrew their submission on parental alienation because the European body over them, called the European Association for Psychotherapists, do not agree with parental alienation. So the Family Therapists Association, actually on their website, you will see that they withdrew their parent alienation submission to the Department of Justice, but the report was already made. So that's why I'm feeling from the same office, the Department of Justice, we had this launch for an intersection, as they called it, for Garda, Tusla and Family Court. And then 3 weeks later, they launched a report on parental alienation, including the Family Therapy Association submission, which was withdrawn later. So that means we have a parent alienation report out there after this intersection that is actually partially withdrawn.
My children have been taken by the force of law and order in Ireland, Holy Ireland. Justice for birth mothers, oh Lord, hear my prayer.
So you then, from what I'm hearing, have concerns that this approach to parental alienation emanating from the Department of Justice is in some way going to impact on how Tusla, the family courts and the Gardai exchange information and how they interact with each other.
This is what I can see from the data you've collected from the mothers, from your podcast. You mentioned the triad that you did a document on in 2019, Anna. That triad that you have had concerns of, that the mothers you represent have concerns of, this is actually what was proposed at that launch, was to put them together and share the data and put it together.
I suppose one of the things that was constantly being highlighted was the failure to investigate, for example, child sex abuse. And it was constantly being reported in the media that the difficulty over the failure to investigate child sex abuse had to do with the fact that there was no mechanism for the Gardai to exchange information with Tusla. So would you not see it as a good thing for Tusla and the Gardai to be able to exchange information with each other?
It should be, Anna. Yes, correct. Absolutely. It should be that the idea of having a one-stop shop for all the needs of the victim of domestic violence is a fantastic idea. However, we have a culture in An Garda Síochána where not so long ago in 2021, we had an apology from the Commissioner in June 2021 for the drop to 999 calls and then the cancelled 999 calls. People went in on the system and were told to cancel the 999 calls. And the culture there of doing that, and after the apology, some months later, the policing authority came out and said that this practice continued. It actually says here, I have it on the statement, issues have persisted despite the intense focus on this matter. So it actually continued. So that's the culture of that. So I would agree in an ideal world that, yes, there should be. However, the culture, that's the culture of An Garda Síochána, and then we have the culture of Tusla, where even just in recent times, just to be very recent about it, you know, we've concerns of children going missing in care, and from your research again, you know, children being taken when there's a mention of domestic violence and put into care. The culture of these organisations are what would be concerning at the moment, to join them at the moment. And then, you know, the problem with the experts that Debbie McCann has been reporting on recently in the Mail on Sunday, that shows how the courts are relying on experts rather than the actual balanced view of the judiciary. They're leaning towards the unbalanced arguments of the experts in the court. Whereas, you know, a judge's oath, he is to be impartial and to make the decisions himself. Justice Charlton came out a few years ago and said that judges are relying on experts too much. So I suppose, given the culture of the three, culture in the Guards, the culture in Tusla, and the culture of the courts.
Look into your mother's face. No one else can take her place. Justice for birth mothers, oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Michelle now explains how a number of state agencies who had been up until now prohibited from sharing personal data with each other have been given the powers to do so under the legislation that was brought in to establish CUAN, the new agency dedicated to tackling domestic, sexual and gender-based violence.
Family law data is actually private. For the government to have that is possibly a data breach, and I know that was addressed in the pre-leg scrutiny.
Just to unpack some of what you have said, basically what you're saying is that you have three dysfunctional organisations. You have the family courts, and they're quite dysfunctional. We know Debbie McCann has highlighted the fact that there are so-called experts who are not accredited operating in the family courts, writing up expert reports, and these are being taken as gospel by the judges and used when decisions are being made about children. And she's highlighted the fact that where mothers report a child's sex abuse, as a result of these expert reports, the mothers ended up losing custody of their children, and the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator of the abuse, ended up with custody. Her most recent report last Sunday is where an expert that has been discredited in the UK is operating freely in the Irish family courts as an expert. So you have a dysfunctional family court, you have dysfunction within the Gardai, and as you referenced there, the cancelling of the 99 calls, and that investigation is still ongoing. And finally, we don't have to elaborate on Tusla, because that has been the subject of 19 podcasts to date, the huge dysfunction that's in Tusla. I mean, just even in the mainstream media now is latching on to this dysfunction, and there's reports on children going missing, children in care are allegedly being trafficked into the sex industry, children in residential care where they are openly smoking dope, all sorts of terrible things happening. What you're saying then is CUAN is the bringing together of three dysfunctional, highly dysfunctional organizations. So what we can expect then going forward, you're claiming, is a dysfunctional organisation. And of course, all of the files and data from Tusla is transferring over to this new agency. Have I articulated there what you are saying?
Nearly, because there's just one part that you mentioned. Going back to the May 2023 report, it talks about joining 3 organisations. But actually, CUAN, that was enacted on the 1st of January this year, 2024, it actually is a lot more government agencies than what was launched in May. It has exploded into the Child and Family Agency, the Health Service Executive, An Garda Síochána, the Court Service, the Irish Prison Service, the Irish Probation Service, and it goes on then about training bodies because they want to have access to do research as well. And so it lists many, many more in the actual Act.
You mentioned there then data and the concerns that you have around the sharing of data and data protection. Just tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the main function of the agency is to share data between the public bodies. And there are a huge list of public bodies in the Act. And just to say, Anna, that the Act is called Domestic, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Agency Act 2023. If anybody wants to look it up, you'll see all the public service bodies that they can share data with each other. And the other function of the agency is to transfer Tusla staff in with the files of Tusla, and also to set up more refuges. I think what they had decided was double the amount of refuges. So that's the kind of function of the CUAN, and the difference between the report they launched in May and what they were discussing in May, and now it's expanded to more government agencies.
Motherhood is hard, support the mother and the child together. Do not tear this love asunder. Support, respect the mother. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Michelle explains how the legislation to establish CUAN was rushed through the Dáil at breakneck speed. That legislation seems to have gone through quite quickly. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there was some pre-legislative scrutiny in April, which is also, to me, confusing, because in April 2023, they started pre-legislative scrutiny, but they really launched the report in the middle of the scrutiny. So I'm not sure why that is. But really, on the 20th of September 2023, it was brought into the first stage of the Dáil, and it ran through very quickly and was enacted on the 28th of November by the President. So it was quite quick. Even the compiling of the report was done very quick earlier in the year. So it's here now, it's law. It was established on the 1st of January 2024. They were given their offices in February 2024, and I emailed the Minister's office on the 28th of March 2024 to ask what was their website and what was their FOI email. And I haven't had a reply yet. Today's only the 4th of April, but we will hopefully get a reply. What exactly is CUAN going to do with that data? We have zero tolerance documents since 2022. One of the very last documents, Anna, on the department's website in relation to zero tolerance of domestic violence mentions children as one of the particular groups, that face barriers and challenges to the law. And the Department of Justice is saying about children that the voice of the child is rarely heard or sought in terms of protection or prosecutions. And then it says later, protective and court systems are not aligned in terms of children's needs. So really, with all this, how can these bodies that are not helping children now suddenly change their culture?
Well, Michelle, I know that you have done a huge amount of research, and I think you have made the point very clear as to your concerns with this agency, which I might add was launched earlier this year in January with great fanfare. And I know that you have said to me on many occasions, it's not more refuge places we need. What we actually need is prosecutions of the perpetrators of domestic violence, put them behind bars or remove them from the family home, rather than having the victims of domestic violence and their children literally, being on the run. So I think, Michelle, that is more or less what we have to say on this whole issue of CUAN. Just before we finish up, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I think just in summary, the prevalence of parental alienation and the experts that Debbie is highlighting at the moment, Debbie McCann in the Mail on Sunday at the moment, the experts in the court, we have found in the Alliance that there is a problem with their vetting actually also, and that they're not always vetted by the courts. And I have a letter from the FTAI that states that the vetting for the FTAI does not transfer to other organisations. We have a real problem here for children. The department is coming out and saying their voice is rarely heard. The protective and court services are not aligned. So if we have experts that aren't vetted, experts that aren't qualified, I really feel like, we can talk about all the paper and reports in the world, but aren't there real children at the end of the day here, Anna, that the services aren't coming up to scratch for? And I feel like these children have no voice, and it's about time that people started educating themselves in what is happening to our children in Ireland and realising the trauma that is being placed upon them by court experts and by our government bodies that are supposed to protect them and not doing so. And I believe that setting up an agency that shares more data between government bodies and then puts mothers and children into refuges, you are hiding the problem. Because I believe, Anna, am I correct in saying if you're in a refuge, you're not actually a homeless statistic?
Correct.
So you're not even a statistic when you're in a refuge. The analogy I always give is, the perpetrators at home, feet up, watching telly, having a cup of tea, and the mother and children in a refuge. There should be an institution for the perpetrator. And, in relation to parent alienation and what these experts are doing then when you go into court, some women in refuges are going into court to keep their children safe and having the children taken off them because of parent alienation. So I really feel like we need to just end it on thinking about the children and the impact that has. And I'd just like to sign off by saying, and it's always been the cover up of innocent children and not looking after children in Ireland.
So on that note, I suppose we can end by saying, which I have said many, many times, we can forgive to a certain extent past generations for what happened to mothers and their children, because they, for the most part, didn't know actually what was happening. But this generation will never be forgiven what is currently happening to mothers and children, because it's hiding in plain sight. Mainstream media really are reporting on it hugely, particularly in recent months. And, I mentioned our single out Jack Power from the Irish Times and Debbie McCann from the Mail on Sunday. So everybody is aware of what is actually happening. And of course, we have to mention Bernard Durkin, who has raised the whole issue of parental alienation, I suppose, close on 30 times since September 2022 in Dáil Éireann. And it's heartbreaking to see him week after week after week raise this under leaders' questions or any other business, and he's getting no place. And we also have to give huge credit to the Aontu leader, Peadar Tóibín. he's also raised the huge dysfunction in Tusla. So it's all hiding in plain sight. And I suppose we end up by saying now that the establishment of CUAN, bringing together the triad, the family law courts, the Gardai and Tusla, is possibly, in our opinion, going on our experience over the last couple of years, is actually a marriage of three very dysfunctional bodies. So what can we but expect? A hugely dysfunctional body going forward, despite the best efforts of those that are involved.
Yeah, so that's my point to sign off. Like, what can we expect? Because we have the Department of Justice coming out and saying protective and court systems are not aligned in terms of children's needs. So why are they joining them together? So we'll watch this space, Anna, and we will come back and we will report on what we have seen.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And I might add at this stage that all of the work done in the Alliance of Birth Mothers campaigning for justice is done on a voluntary basis. Nobody receives any payment and we don't receive any funding of any description. So it's volunteerism at its best. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Anna.
Justice for Birth Mothers is a co-production between the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice and 𝑀 Media. Thank you for listening, and please share this podcast with your family, friends and contacts. Until next time, 𝐵𝑖𝑟𝑡ℎ 𝑀�Ｏ𝑡ℎ𝑒𝑟𝑠.
In the land where I was born, there are now women seeking justice. Justice for birth mothers, oh Lord,